Hello and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial where today we're going to create this magical monument design. Now as always there's links to all of the requirements over on my Patreon. There's a link to that in the description down below. We can grab all of the requirements for today's design. Make sure to subscribe for weekly tutorials, and if you want even more tutorials from me, come and join me over on my Patreon where I post 3 exclusives every single month to my Patreon supporters, and the catalogue just continues to grow. So check that out using the link in the description down below. Enjoy today's tutorial and let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, you'll be able to see from mine that I've already got my canvas guide on here already. So if I go to my layers, you can see I've got the guide in there. You'll need to download it as a PNG, which I've provided, and then go to your actions, go to add and insert it from your photos or files, depending on where you've saved it to, and then add it in as a new layer. Once you've done that, we're then going to go ahead and go to our background color. Let's set it to this color here, bottom right of the palette. We'll hit done. And then what you can do, you can tap on your guide and use the option of invert. It flips it from the one color to its opposite color, which in this case is black to white. And we can just bring that down to around about sort of 42%. We'll create a new layer. We'll drag it underneath our guide. We'll go to our colors and we're going to go ahead and grab this color here, top of the third column from the right. We'll go to our brush and we will use the option of calligraphy, and we're going to use the monoline brush. And then here, we're going to go ahead with the smallish brush size, maximum opacity. We're just going to run along this line here, making your way through the back of the scene around to here. And then you're going to come down this line here. You can add some minor bumps and lumps in there if you want to. We're going to add some more in a moment with a brush to give like a tree-like aesthetic to it. And then drag and drop your color into that space. Then what we'll go ahead and do is we'll go to our layer. We're going to tap on it and we're going to use the option here of select. Now I want you to go ahead and make sure color fill is grayed out down here. Then you're going to want to hit the option of invert here. So we've inverted this selection. We're now selecting everything but it. We'll go to our layers and we'll create a new layer. We'll go to our colors and we'll grab the color again in the bottom right of the palette down there, and we'll drag it into this bottom space. Now you won't see any visual change, but if you take a look at your layers, you've now created a water, and if I invert that, you can now see that we've added in that space here. That's now perfectly against the edge there of our land. So that'll help us out. Let's then go ahead and add in our sky. So let's go ahead and turn off our guide. We don't necessarily need that on. We're going to create a new layer and we're going to drag it all the way to the bottom in front of your background color. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the middle of the far right column, and your brush wants to be set to airbrushing and the soft brush. Now with that set to around about sort of 25%, we're going to add in some lovely blue tones. So we're going to go horizontally here, fairly light and not too high. Like so something like that, nice and blue towards the sort of horizon in behind here though, but nicely fading off on the edges. We'll then go ahead and go to our layers. Now I'm going to create a new layer because I always like to potentially move layers around when we create gradients like this. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'll go to my colors and I'll grab the purple in the top right of the palette, and then we're going to add that on top of this blue tone. And this is somewhat going to cover up the majority of it. We're just going to leave a little bit of the bloom also on the right hand side, but we also want to cover over it quite a bit with this purple. We want the purple to run fairly high on the left, but very faint up towards the top. So you get a tiny bit of blue over here, more so purple over this side. Again, layers, new layer, color, next color, which is this orange tone, top of the second column from the right. And we're going to add that in a little bit lower down now, across the horizon a little bit in behind there, and a little bit more orangey over here. There we go. So we should start to see a bit of a gradient of color, and then go to your layer again and create another new layer. And this will be our final tone. We'll go to our colors, middle of the second column from the right, probably a little bit smaller of a brush size, about 16% now. And just in behind here, we just want to show how the sun has left where we are. It's dipped in behind this hillside and it just goes along here like so. Now we've got a lovely gradient of color. Again, as I mentioned, you can go ahead and move this around now. You could grab the blue, for example, and grab your cursor and move it up if you want a little bit more blue in that sky at the top. You can go ahead and tap on any color and move it around. So you've got more flexibility like this. If you want to and you've got the layers available, just swipe from left to right on all 4, group them together, rename that group and call it sky. Next up, let's add in some nebula colors in the sky. So what we're going to do is we'll go to our color. We're going to grab the blue again, the middle of the far right column. We're going to go to our layers. In the sky group, we will create a new layer. We'll tap on it and change its blend mode from normal to add. And then we're going to go to our brush. We're going to go to the option of luminance. It's right towards the bottom. It'll say luminance for you. And you want this nebula brush. We want the opacity set to about 70%. We'll start off with a fairly large brush size, around about let's say around about 10 to 12%. And then very, very lightly with your pressure, just add in like the odd little sort of specks of different color here, like over here, a little bit running across the center of our canvas maybe. Lovely. And then a couple of extra very, very light specks to start with. Then bring your opacity, your brush size down to about 6%. And then we'll focus like a little bit of brighter blue over here. So press in a little bit firmer, let it wrap round a tiny bit, go up towards the top of your screen. Just keep it very simple though, don't overdo this. I urge you to do less if possible. So a little bit of 4% then, just run in across there. That's all I'm going to do for the blues. I'll then go to my colors and grab the purple, top right of the palette. And we'll do some sort of trail, making its way down from up there, along in towards some of those blues, and then maybe just along a tiny bit, and then maybe a tiny little bit over there. Very, very, very light with my pressure though. Let's go to our colors. Orange tone next, top of the second column from the right, and you're kind of just layering in a tiny bit of sort of variation in the lighting in the color spectrum of the sky. So a little bit up there in orange, and we'll go to our colors and we'll grab the yellow. It is the middle color in that second column from the right, and we'll add in a tiny bit back here. Just a little bit. You can go a little bit behind there if you wish, but don't overdo it. Keep it simple. Next, let's go ahead and go to our adjustments. Let's go to liquify, and we're going to use the option here of crystals. We're going to set the brush size to around about 50%, and all the rest of them are maxed out. And you just want to drag your pen across some of those nebular effects, just kind of dispersing the color a tiny bit, like so. Then we'll go ahead and tap on our adjustments. We'll go to our Gaussian blur. Left to right on the screen, go up to around about 7%. That should leave you with a little bit of shape, but you can go a little bit higher if you want, or less if you actually really like the shape of it. But I'm going to go to about 7, and I'm going to tap on my adjustments when we're done. Now next up, we're going to go ahead and introduce some stars that are going to sit in the sky. So we'll go to our layers, we'll create a new layer. We'll go to our colors, and we're going to go ahead and grab a nice bright tone for that. And that is going to be this color here. It's the middle of the fourth column from the right. We're going to go to our brush, in luminance still, just scroll up and use the light pen. You can set the size to max if you like. It's very pressure sensitive, so you can just tap a few times and get some really small ones, especially if you tap really lightly, or you can press really firm and add in some bright blue options here in your sky for some stars. And we just want to tap away, filling in the sky. So start off fairly lightly with your pressure, I would, if you can, and maybe even bring the size of the brush down if you're really struggling with pressure sensitivity. Also be careful not to drag, otherwise you'll create like a line. You can potentially towards the latter stages, if I'm honest, like create a shooting star or two if you like the look of that in your design. Towards the beginning, I would probably keep it a little bit more simple. I wouldn't overdo it too early with details, because it might get covered up by our little monument anyway. So we don't want to do too much in areas that we don't actually know if we're going to be able to see yet. Now, just simply based off of the sky, these stars up here in the top right, we're probably going to see more of them because they're in the darker spot. Less of the sunrise or sunset, should I say, is getting in the way. So over here in the top right, you could probably afford to be a little bit more generous with the amount of stars that you add in here. You can press really, really fine and add in lots of super tiny little details in there if you wish. But we can add some lovely little speckled stars in our sky. Now, I typically always do like a blanket like this. I'll go to the layer. I'll go ahead and swipe it to the left and duplicate it. I'll grab my cursor. Then I'll scale it down in size and just sort of move it around and try and just add an additional sort of quantity to the sky. So I'll just move it up into there, and then maybe I'll swipe that to the left again and duplicate it and move that around and maybe add some more stars over on the left hand side up towards the top. As long as you can't see any repetition, you're all good to do that sometimes and save yourself some time. And let's see if we can go ahead then and pinch all of these 3 layers of our stars together. Tap on the layer and change the blend mode to the option of add. Now that might make a few of those a little bit too bright. You may want to go ahead and tap on the layer and just bring the opacity down, potentially down to about 50%, depending on how many or how bright you want your stars to be. But for me, I'm going to leave it like that, because now I'm going to move on into this area of land here. So let's go ahead and let's then move up to this layer here. Now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and create a new layer. We'll tap on it and we'll clipping mask it. We'll then go ahead and for a moment, I'm going to set my color to white because the colors that we're going to use are very subtle and you might not be able to see them too well. So I'm going to set my color to white just temporarily. I'm going to go to my brush. I'm going to go to drawing and evolve. And we're going to set the brush size to around about 5%. Now what I want you to imagine is up here is fairly flat. So we've got like flat lines. And then as they start to sort of get a little bit towards the bottom, they're going to get fairly straight. So they're all going to start pointing down like this in a bit more of a vertical fashion. Now this brush, you're not going to see too much of the actual details. We are going to be drawing this in fairly straightforward. We're not going to be adding in too much context or detail. It's going to get covered up by glows. It's going to get covered up by just other items that are going to sit in front. So you really don't need to focus on this too much at all. You know, you can draw in these lines, and the fact that the colors are going to be far more subtle in a moment when we change them to the correct color, you are not going to see this at all. So let's just draw in all of these lines across the top, you know, drawing in different avenues, different ledges, different areas of lighting. Let's just run down into here. Let's just make sure we keep that size around about where it was. Sorry, about 4%. I'm going to keep drawing in, and you don't need to go all the way to the bottom either. Leave the bottom as sort of a little bit empty. You don't need to add in too much down there. Add in little dashes and dots of color. Add in large planes of land as well that you think would run nicely into each other. You can prioritize one side over the other as well if you want to just run a line across like that and just run some color across the screen. But you can also introduce large planes of land like that, or something like this. Very, very simple. It's just going to add in a little bit of context just in case it's visible. A couple more in there. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and go to our layer. We'll tap on it. We'll alpha lock it. We'll go to our colors. We're going to grab the top color in that third column from the right. We're going to go to the layer. We're going to tap on it and we're going to fill it. Now that's actually the same as the background color. So what we'll do is we'll grab the next shape down, the base shape. We'll go to our colors and we'll grab the middle tone in the third column from the right, and we'll drag it into there. Now you might just about be able to see now these somewhat very subtle purpley tones. I can just about see them on camera. Next, what we'll do is we'll go to our layer. We'll create a new layer above. We'll tap on it and we'll clipping mask it also. We'll go ahead and go to our colors and grab this green tone at the bottom of the third column from the right. It's ever so slightly green. You'll have to give me the benefit of the doubt. And then we're going to go ahead and use evolve again. You'll be able to see this one much more, but we're going to use it on top of some of those purple lines to show some vegetation, some areas on here that are visible and are running on top of the blueprints that we've just set out of all of those lines running down the hills. Use tapping motions if you can, just a few taps here and there. You can use scrapes and draw down lines as well if you wish, but as long as you use the blueprint that you created and focus towards the top half in this area here, not below that line necessarily. Adding in some interesting areas here towards the middle, up on that top edge. This is just background content. You don't need to sort of flush this out too much necessarily. We just want to give a nod to the fact that there's some detail back there. We don't want to just also leave it completely plain either. We want it to have some information in there, something to work out when you're looking at this. So little lines running in. I know my monument's going to be in the middle, so I'm not going to add too much contents there. And that's looking nice. A couple of little dashes in the gaps just to add in a little bush or something in that gap. Now one thing we then need to do is we need to go to our colors and grab the middle of the third column from the right. Let's go back down to our base shape here, making sure you're on that layer, and we're going to go ahead and run our brush. So let's set the brush size to around about 5 or 6% and just run your brush along that top edge. You can pretty much do it in a line as long as you just go all the way along and just occasionally wiggle your pen up and down occasionally. You should be able to create this illusion of kind of like some trees and vegetation up here, and it's very, very small areas of detail and of structure. And you can always go back in like I just did there and draw in the odd occasional tree here and there that just you want to highlight a bit more. Nothing too detailed, but just enough to break that landscape up and create something a bit more interesting to look at. Some rounded fluffy shapes might look pretty good, but again, don't overdo it. It's meant to be fairly simple. Now what we're then going to do is we're going to go ahead and pinch these layers together. We are done with that hillside, so we're going to pinch them together and the detail will now all be on one layer. And then on that layer, we're going to go to our adjustments. We're going to go to Gaussian blur. We're going to swipe from left to right, and we're going to add in a 3 to 4% Gaussian blur. I'm going to go for a 4%, and then that will just fluff up that edge a little bit. It will get rid of some of those details, and you can tap on your adjustments when you're done. We then want to also go ahead and go to our layer. We'll create a new layer. We'll now tap on it and clipping mask it again to that shape. We're going to go to our colors and grab this blue, top of the fourth column from the right. And we're going to go to our brushes, airbrushing, soft brush. Let's make that around about sort of, let's go a bit bigger than that, about 20%. We're going to go left to right with the blue. So starting off a little bit more blue towards the bottom and then fading that out towards the top, overlapping a little bit of your, your land details that you created, adding in a lovely gradient of blue. Then you can go to your colors and grab the middle of the fourth column from the right. And then this one sits a little bit lower. This one goes just kind of in behind. I've just made the brush a little bit smaller. And then this is just going to run left to right, just along that kind of edge of the water there. Now, because this is on a separate layer, you could always go in and just bring it down if you needed to, maybe down just a few percentage if it's a little bit too bright. But that's something you can play with later on, should that be something that you need to do. Let's then start moving into our main monument. So we're going to leave those layers there for the minute. You can even swipe from left to right and group them two together if you wish and just call it hills. We'll collapse that keyboard down. We don't need that. We're going to go ahead and go in front of this block that we created down here, which we can actually rename and call water for now. And then in front of there, we'll create a new layer. We'll turn on our guide. We need that back in frame. And we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the color in the top left of the palette. We're going to go to our brush. We're going to go to calligraphy and the monoline brush. And the other thing we want to do is go to our actions, canvas, drawing guide, and turn that on, and edit the drawing guide to use the option of symmetry and the option of vertical. You'll get this line running down the middle, and what that means is if I hit done, if I go to my layer, it now says assisted underneath the name of the layer. By the way, if it doesn't say that, just tap on it, tap on drawing assist, and it will check, meaning it's using the drawing assist. And what that means is what we draw on one side is reflected on the other. So we can draw this monument in now really quickly. So we can draw in straight lines down here, focusing only on the one side, because of course the symmetry guide is going to do all the work for us on the opposite side. We can draw down here, little lump out, follow the guide for your details and your ledges, your bumps and your lumps in here. And then as you get towards the bottom here, just come down and sort of go across in a bit of a rounded base there. And then we want to come back up again on the opposite side. And I need to somewhat mimic my shape on the left. So just in case I made something ever so slightly different to the guide, you just want to make sure that your design matches up where possible, because you're going to need all these bumps and lumps. And at the top, all we want to do is focus on the exterior. So we're coming around here, these flame-like rock aesthetics here. And we're just creating all of these curves in the rock and then creating another curve into here. I'm going to go ahead and just join them up across the bottom, creating the arc for the underside. Got this beautiful big rocky pattern in here at the top, and these beautiful pieces of design and architecture up here on the top of our little monument, and just draw in all the shapes around the edge anyway. You can draw perfect arcs as well if you want to. Hold your pen down to create arcs, and then draw in this shape up here, curving it around, trying to create all the bumps that I can see in my guide up towards the top. And as long as you linked it at the bottom, you should be able to drag and drop your color in. Triple check that is on its own layer and the guide is not connected, which it's not. And now we can get started on adding in some lighting to this. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to tap on it and clipping mask it. We're going to tap on it and drawing assist it. And we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the middle of the second column there. And we're going to go to our brush, painting, and we're going to use the Nico roll brush. If you don't like this brush, by all means, change it to something else if you wish. Size wants to be fairly small to start with, around about 2%. And then we're going to zoom in on our work. Let's go ahead and focus on either side. Again, the layer, if we just triple check, it says assisted. So it's going to do it on the opposite side. We don't need to worry about it. So we're going to use our guide, which by the way, we can probably just tone down a little bit further again. And then on this layer, we want to isolate the top ledges of some of these areas here that are getting some lighting. Multiple streaks will look good. Lighting is primarily going to sit on top of some of these areas and in the gaps. So for example, I've got this curve here that sticks out. I can go ahead and draw in a line across there, sometimes in one motion, sometimes in two, sometimes with additional strokes underneath just to kind of blend it out. The lighting again is primarily going to be coming from this central area. So we can go ahead and add in some lighting that represents that. Probably a little bit smaller now, if not smaller again, probably 2 to 1%. So I can draw in a line that runs along there, focusing the lighting on the right hand side. Again, I've got another little edge there that I can just go ahead and do a 2% around the base of our column over here, with another 2% kind of line running through the gap there as well, leaving your shadows underneath each element of the rock. And you can see on the ends they're a little bit more faded out. We can always touch them up later on, so don't worry too much if you don't manage that first time. We're going to skip the columns for a minute because we're going to go right to the top of them. And again, with that 2% brush size, we're just going to create our first little curve along here. Now, again, it's important that we kind of start on the inside, get really light with our pressure as it rounds off towards the left-hand side. Again, we can always fix it in a moment. I'm going to create another one that just runs a little bit above that, a little bit lighter potentially. That's also fine. I've then got this big curve here. So I imagine that this is one shape here. So I'm going to go ahead and add some color to that, maybe with a slightly bigger brush size, maybe around about 3%. Zooming in, I'm just going to go ahead and just go along there, getting a little bit faded on that left-hand side and adding in a good chunk of color, but fading it out by using lighter brush strokes towards the top edge of it. From there, I can then see this band that runs across. So I'm going to set the brush size to something smaller again, now about 1%, and create like a bit of a separating band between there. That gives me more details to work with shortly. We've got that lovely piece in there. Then we've got this curving kind of shape here, where we're going to go all the way from there, all the way around to here, and then create multiple lines in between. So let's start at the top of that kind of shape. Let's go over here, really lightly with your pressure, and then just create a bit more of a hard press on the right. I've held my pen down so I can continue editing this arc. So I'm going to go into this corner. I'm going to edit the arc. I'm just going to try and give it a bit more of a curve in the correct spaces. A little bit more of a raise on the right hand side there for me. That looked a little bit odd. There we go. And then I've got a bit of a gap now that I can fill in with multiple rows of rock and just like grooves in here. So another curve, fairly light towards that left hand side, heavy again, fairly light out towards there if you can manage it. Sometimes you might not be able to, and that's fine. You can just fix it later. So we've got some nice grooves in our rock there. We're then going to go ahead and add in some detailed areas here. So we've got this kind of leaf shape here. Let's go ahead and itemize that. So let's bring the brush size down to 1%. I'm going to go ahead and come along here, along there, and then down. I'll go over the top of that line and just separate that with the rocky detail. I've got the exterior sort of flame over here. I'm going to go up its edge, and I'm going to come down into there like so. And occasionally, even in these areas here, you can always go ahead and add in like a secondary groove right next to it. Really, really faint though. And that just kind of shows like there's a bit of a bevel almost in this shape. There we go. We've got the flame here at the top. Let's go ahead and draw in some detail for here. Now I'm going to make this one a little bit fancy. I'm going to come down the top of this peak here. I'm going to come round into a curve here, into a bit of a spiral. And then from there, I'll work out some new details. Let's turn off our guide. I don't need that on for just this moment. I'm going to come down here, let this one run all the way down and fade it into that previous line. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect. And then I'll create a new line into there. And then I'll create a curve and then another curve. And then this one maybe wraps around and into there. And we can just create some interesting beveled rock and carved stone for some styling. And then maybe we'll create another groove in this one as well, just to kind of keep that a little bit more on point with the rest of it. Zooming out, some cool detail in there. Let's carry on with our design. Now we'll turn on our guide again just so we know where we're drawing in, because I've obviously itemized quite a lot of this already. Now one area we definitely want to itemize is this area here. It is the underside of this arc. Now I don't want to just draw in a line, I want to draw in lots of lines making their way up in this direction. So I'm going to start with a 2% brush size and I'm going to come up towards that line and just keep creating all of these little line shapes all the way along here to kind of show that the underside of the arc is fairly detailed, fairly carved into. Looks really cool and detailed. We'll add in a tiny bit more there as well. So that's that underside. We can then focus on a few of the elements that sit just in front of that, on the face almost of this. So about 2% again brush size. We've got these curl shapes that we can create in here. So starting off in here, I'm going to create a lovely curl. In fact, I'll do that one again. That one didn't have enough paint to it, that one. I'm going to let that run into the corner. I'm going to undo that. That one had a little bit too much. So we'll run that into the corner. We'll bring the brush size down to about 1%. we'll take a look around that. Is there anything that you could introduce in the gap? So just a little curve here, maybe a little groove there, and a little groove under here too, just to separate it a tiny bit. And can I then see where I'm going to draw in the rest of the shapes up here? We've got these two circles. Let's just do some spirals. So let's start in the middle. We start off really small and we just gradually get bigger and bigger. So starting off in the middle, you just want to leave like a fairly decent gap between your lines there and go all the way up to the edge. So it doesn't have to be perfectly sort of spherical either. We'll create a curve along here and then create some groove lines in there too. Maybe a little one in that gap. I've got another circle here that I need to introduce. Again, I'm going to start in the middle. I'm going to curve my spiral out from that point and go all the way around, right up and over the top. So I've got that curve in there. I've got this little gap now, so I can create like a triangular kind of groove in there. So I can see now in the middle, I want to start up here. I want to create this line here that runs all the way down into there. And then from there, I've got this gap now that I can start to work on, and I want to create horizontal lines. So I'm going to come across from that line, and that should then help me separate the underside of the arc from the top. I'm going to continue on this line. You can just create any pattern you like, to be honest, but all of these little details, they just help create grooves and avenues for the rock design. In the center here, I'm going to start off somewhat following on from those lines underneath. So I'm just going to draw in some straight lines up, and in fact they're probably a little bit too close together, so I'll create a gap in between now that is a little wider, and then that allows me to perfectly fill the space. Now the area in the center, of course we're using the drawing guide, so we don't need to sort of think about either side. So you can start, say at the very top, you can create a curve that runs all the way down in towards the middle. So I've drawn the circle. I've got these little elements on the right. We don't want to forget about them. So just a couple of lines off from there. At the top, I want to go ahead and just, we need to make sure the lighting's on the underside. So we're just going to add in a little bit of lighting under there, leaving the top a little bit more towards the front. I'll then add in some lighting under here as well in this groove. In the gaps on the side, I think we can maybe go ahead and run that down, in fact, and connect it into those little edges. We've got the circle at the very top just to draw in, so we're going to go ahead and draw in a circle. It doesn't need to be perfect in any way, as long as it's fairly close to the center, and you just continue to somewhat try and keep your gap nice and consistent around the outside. Now, I've definitely not got a consistent gap all the way around, but it still looks pretty cool. When you zoom out, you should have this beautiful detailed design. I've left these areas here. It's totally up to you if you want to add in some sort of further detail to them. You can maybe go ahead and add in like a leaf style design in there. So it's like a line running through and a couple of stem lines off. That should give it a nice look to it. And now we need to just focus on our columns. So we're going to set our brush size to around about sort of 2 to 3%. And we're going to draw in those running down the center of our design. So we want to first of all draw the middle one. We want to draw the middle one running down all the way down to the bottom. Hold your pen down if you can to get a nice straight line. And if you can, don't go as heavy as I just did. Start off really light with your pressure, especially you want to end with some really light pressure as well. We want these columns to have a nice rounded look to them. And as they start to make their way round towards the left-hand side in a minute, we're going to thin out this line as well. So it's not going to look quite as thick as this. So I'm drawing in now my next line. And then I want the next line to be a little bit closer to that line that I just drew in. So the gap in between will get a bit shorter. And then this one over here, I'm going to make sure is right up against the edge, but also has a very, very thin gap between each one of those. Then as I make my way around into the shaded side, I'm going to bring the brush size down to a slightly smaller 2% and just create some fairly skinny lines that are just rolling around the edge here of our column. Really faint now with our pressure, keeping it nice and light as it makes its way around onto the opposite side. You can get the idea then that there's some columns, but the inside has more of this base tone to it, and you get that circular aesthetic to it. Next, let's go ahead and build on top of this. Let's turn off our guide, by the way. We don't need that on at the top necessarily now. We're going to go ahead and swipe this layer to the left and duplicate it. We're going to alpha lock it, so we're going to tap on it and alpha lock it. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab a really nice bright blue, which is going to be this color here, bottom of the second column there. We'll go back to the layer, we'll tap on it, we'll fill it. So using fill, it then goes bright blue, but obviously that's way too bright. So what we'll do is we'll tap on it, we'll add a mask to it, We'll make sure we're on the mask and your color is set to black at the bottom of the disc. Go to your brush, go to airbrushing and the soft brush. And with a brush size maybe around about let's go smaller than that. Let's go about 7 or 8%. Let's then get rid of the lighting around the outer edges that we don't want to see anymore. And what that will do is that will reveal that darker blue in behind. So we're going to bring that down here, making sure it's completely gone on the exterior edge. And maybe you can wrap that round at the bottom just a little bit lower and a bit of an angle here to some of these lines. You can then take a look at your design up here. This arc here, remember, is the underside of the arch. So let's go ahead and sort of erase everything above. We'll then do the same on the column's edge at the top. Get rid of all of that, all the way around this outside. And what you do is then you focus all the lighting on the central area coming through that spot. But that is a little bit too kind of boring, in my opinion. There's loads more we could do with this. So let's go ahead first of all. Let's set the brush size down to like a 2%. Let's take a look at some of these lines and see if we can give them a bit of a beveled edge to them. So for example, can we go ahead and bring it even smaller than that? Can we go ahead and sort of darken up, say, the top edge like there and fade that down a little bit? So just the top where the lighting's facing away. Could you get into some of those lines there and kind of give them a little bit as well? You may need to go even smaller with your brush size like I am, about 1% now. Just like the top edge of some of those lines. Giving them a bit more of a beveled edge to them. There we go. Could you do the same down any of these columns? Take a look, see what you think. I think the only thing I need to do somewhat is actually just take away a bit of this lighter blue in this area here, just separating that a tiny bit more. And that's actually looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. But we can go a step further. Let's go back to our brush and go back to painting. And let's use the Nico roll again. We're going to set the brush size to around about 2%. And what we're now going to do is we're going to look at our design and we're going to pick out lines that we want to add the highlight to. We want to splash that color up and out. So let's take a look at this line here, for example. I'm going to run down the underside of it and we want to make sure that our color is now set to white. So we're going to reveal the color again. We're going to go down the underside of that line and add in this lovely little bit of lighting on the underside of some of these elements and really make them pop. And what we can really do to keep that going is take a look at up here into our design. Can we go ahead and you want to keep the brush size fairly small, about 1%, go down some of those lines and just bring them back to life. The underside of this spiral here, the center point of it as well. The underside of some of these lines here, can we go ahead and add in some lighting on them where the light's just casting up and onto those lines as they stick out of the monument. Look how cool that looks already. Let's go ahead then and zoom in. Let's see what else we can do. Maybe the underside of that line. And then let's imagine that certain elements stick out further than other elements. So these spirals, let's imagine that they actually do stick up and out of the fascia of this. So it's like leaning a little bit outwards. And we can go ahead and light the underside of those. Likewise here, with a little bit more of an angle to these. See how I'm pointing that a little bit more towards the central point of our design where the magic is going to be coming from. Maybe the odd little line back there. Just a tiny bit. And you're getting all this underlit lighting scenario. It looks lovely. Looks so cool. Let's go ahead and then go underneath some of these curves here of our central circle up there, right up towards the top. And I don't think you can afford to go any higher than that because all of those elements are then somewhat on the far side of our design. We can't really get to them. The other thing you can do though is make sure that like certain elements like down here just have a good amount of lighting, you know, on these little ledges. You can always revert backwards and forwards though between the two of your revealing and hiding. Some of your columns, you might just be able to go down this line here. See how I'm just adding in like a pixel or two's worth of lighting. I might even be able to go a bit bigger than that. Just a little bit more down that edge there. I can definitely make sure that the edge of this one's got a nice amount of color to it. And just these odd little specks here and there just will look really, really tidy. As I mentioned, you can always switch your color back to black and start to hide things again. You know, if you feel like this line here is a bit too solid on that exit there as it makes its way away, then we'll just get rid of it. We'll go ahead and maybe run in a bit more of a shadow into here, maybe a little bit more of a shadow on the underside of some of these elements. It will just give it so much character, so much detail. And I think that looks wicked. We've got this beautiful underlit glow scenario. But there's more lighting to this scene, isn't there? We've got this lovely bit of lighting over here. Let's go ahead then and create another new layer. Tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll go ahead and add in some yellowy tones. So we'll go to our colors and grab this tone here, top of the second column from the right. And we're going to go ahead and add in some lighting. So up here, we're going to add in some right up against the edge. So I'm going to go about 2 or 3%, just so I've got a fairly large brush size. Keep your pressure nice and light. It's very easy to overdo this brush. But a little bit of lighting running around the top edges of some of these rocks. There's some of the design up here, about 2% now. And I might even bring the opacity down myself, down to about 70%. A little bit on there too. Let's add in a slightly larger 4% there, just a tiny bit around this edge there. Again, where the lighting's on the opposite side. So we're going to get this two-tone situation happening. Let's then wrap a bit of lighting around the top of here too. A little bit around the very top edges of some of this design up here, and over the top of our design, that's kind of shaped point up here, and more so on the left-hand side there. Adding in that yellow, or orange should I say, and a little bit over the top of there. And maybe some of it just stretches far enough that we can light up the other flame design on the opposite side over there. So we've got a lovely bit of lighting coming across from that side. Now at this point, we also want to sort of show how much that lighting really is coming across from that side. So let's go to our layers. Earlier on, we've got our hills group. We can go ahead and create a new layer that we want to clip to that. So we'll open that up. If you've compressed them all down, it's fine. Just create a new layer and clip it to the base shape. We're going to go to our color, making sure it's still this color here, top of the second column from the right. Your brush wants to be set to airbrushing and a soft brush. We're going to set the brush size to something fairly large, maybe around about sort of a little bit towards the 20 to 25% range. And then just where our brightest point was, just there, we're going to go round in a bit of a circle and just introduce a little bit of orange, just a bit of a light glow coming from that point. Let that stretch a little bit further. And also then go to your colors and grab the yellow. Keep this really, really light, and I'll show you why. If you go to the yellow in the middle of the second column from the right, go to your layer now and tap on it and change its blend mode to the option of pin light. It's right towards the bottom. Where is it? Pin light. And we get this lovely warm tone coming over the hillside now. If we use the yellow, I've brought my brush size down to about sort of 10%. If you press really firm too quickly, you're going to get this really ugly yellow tone. It wants to be really, really light with your pressure just to brighten up the top of that hill, create a bit of variation between those more magenta tones. You should end up with this lovely bit of lighting just wrapping its way over the hillside there. It's very subtle. You want to keep it subtle. You may even want to bring the opacity down of it if you've gone a bit too far, or even redo it. It's totally up to you. I'm going to go to max and leave it where it is, but hopefully that just gives that area there a bit more lighting. And that's something that you may also need to do with your background, is grab the yellow, for example, and just make sure that there is enough yellow just sticking up from behind there. So just bear that in mind if that's something you can do. And if you otherwise want to, you could create a new layer, tap on the blend mode and set it to add, and just add in a very light amount of yellow just there, just to show that the light source is literally just there. And that gives you the impression then of everything coming across. So I'll collapse my sky group down again, and I'll collapse my hills group down again. Now the only thing we need to do is go to our water group here. We're going to go to our colors, and we're going to go ahead and grab the color in the bottom right of the palette. Soft airbrush still. I just want you to go ahead and just add in a tiny bit of color along this edge here. A little bit, very, very light, and get rid of it, because when we blurred the land itself was pixel perfect up against this edge, and now we end up with a little bit of a white line. So we're just trying to get rid of that. You may need to press fairly firm and get rid of it, but you'll be able to see that all disappear. Now let's go ahead and reflect the background before we add the magic, and then reflect that later. So we're going to go ahead and turn off our monument. Make sure your guide is also turned off. Let's go ahead then, and we'll swipe down with 3 fingers. We'll go to copy all. We'll swipe down with 3 fingers again. We'll go to paste. We'll go to our layers, and we'll get a brand new layer that says inserted image. It wants to be above your water. If you tap on it and clip it, if you turn on your monument again, the inserted image, we're going to grab our cursor. We're going to use the option of flip vertical. We're going to move it down, and we're going to add in a beautiful bit of reflection there in the water. Now you can take a bit of an artistic liberty here and maybe freeform it just a little bit, just to get in a little bit more of that beautiful sky that you created. Make sure snapping is turned on so that you can get right up to the edges, and make sure there's no 1 or 2 pixel gap on either side. And you might want to move that up slightly, just a little bit, again, to get some more color. Tap on your cursor when you're done. Let's go ahead and first of all, let's create another new layer. Tap on it and clipping mask it. And while we're here, let's swipe from left to right on all three of the water layers and group them together and just call it water. I always like to keep groups organized so you can grab individual items. Now this layer here that we created, the new one, change its blend mode from normal to the option of soft light. Go to your colors and grab this color here. It's on its own right in the middle of the canvas, and drag and drop it onto the screen. Your water now will get a little bit more of a subtle look to it. It should be a little bit more blue compared to the sky. You can turn it off, on and off, just to see that difference. And then the layer that we pasted in underneath, go to your adjustments. We're going to go to the option of motion blur. We're going to tap and drag horizontally until we move up to around about sort of 45%. We're going to really take down a lot of that shape. If you want to keep more of it, drag to the left and bring that percentage at the top down. But I'm going to go to 45%, making sure it's nice and horizontal. And when I'm done, I will tap on my adjustments when I'm done. Now at this point, before we carry on, I just want to go ahead and add in some elements that are just going to help blend that line between the water and the land. So in the water group, just create a new layer, but make sure it's not clipped. Go to your colors. We're going to want to add in some light blue just to fade that out. So we're going to grab this color here, the middle of the fourth column from the right. Your brush wants to be set to the soft brush under airbrushing still, and maybe around about sort of a 5% brush size. You're just going to want to lightly just wiggle your pen along that line, and then slightly up as well, just very, very lightly. You may need to bring the brush size down and also bring the opacity down if that's something you struggle with. And then a little bit over towards the right hand side as well. So I'm just going to wiggle my pen along that edge. I just want to fade that line out a little bit between the two sides of the top and the bottom. So I'm just going back up to 4 or 5% now, sorry. Just wiggling my pen along there, trying to create some misty cloud-like shapes and pressing it a tiny bit firmer in certain areas along that line just to maybe get rid of a few of the solidness from that shape area. There is a second layer that we need to introduce, so we'll go to our layers and create another new layer. We'll go ahead and go to our brush and we'll change it to the option of elements and clouds. Let's set the brush size to about 10%, and then we can just squiggle in some cloud-like misty area into here, hopefully adding on a little bit more color in there. You can bring it a little bit further down. You can always fluctuate the brush size as well. You can go up to 15% if you wish, and add in a tiny bit running in behind our little monument as well. A couple of specks a little bit higher might look quite nice too. Bringing that brush size down into that gap about 11% there. Just trying to tone it down a little bit, give it a little bit of a more mystical, magical look. If that starts to get a little bit too sort of crisp compared to the rest, just go to your smudge tool, tap on your smudge tool and use the soft brush, and then just get in there and just break down a few of those shapes by just smudging them out. So about 2% brush size it looks like will do the trick in this area, but you can just smudge out a few of those fairly crisp details of the clouds brush, and you can also push them around a little bit as well, just to try and break them down. But you'll get that lovely hazy kind of misty look. Wiggle your pen, don't be afraid to really smudge it into a large area. Push it quite horizontal as well if you want to get some like nice streaks across there. And the difference looks quite a lot compared to the two before and after. Just wiggling that along there, just trying to break down a few of those shapes. Some crispiness in some of those cloud-like shapes are really good. You can keep them, but you just a little bit just to, again, break down that horizon. Potentially we'll be able to also bring that down again shortly. Now let's go ahead and add in a lovely glow to our monument and all of the magic. So we'll create a new layer. It will sit itself underneath the monument there. We're going to go ahead and go to our colors. We're going to grab the blue tone here, the middle of the second column. We're going to go to our layer, tap on it and change its blend mode to the option of add. And you're going to want to use the soft airbrush under airbrushing. So we'll go back into our brush. We'll go back to the option of airbrushing if I can find it. Soft brush, maybe around about sort of a 15 to 20%. And then just in the middle of your frame here, you're going to want to just go over the top of it. Look at how much more purple, a bit more glowy it's now going to start to get. You can come down into that gap just a tiny bit, and you can just make sure it's nicely covered. If you press super firm, it shouldn't go too colorful because it's fairly limited in its options and availability. I'm trying to now show that there's a variation in color here, and also that the center of our design here, in terms of inside the monument, has a sort of portal-like aesthetic to it. And to add to that, we're going to add in some waves in there as well. So we'll go to our layers, we'll create a new layer. We'll go ahead and go to our colors. we'll grab a fairly bright tone, which is going to be this one here. It's the top of the third column. Your brush wants to be set to the option of, let's go to its elements again, and it's the oceans brush. Let's go ahead and max the brush size out, max the opacity out, and just go ahead and just go left to right across your screen. Don't press too firm, keep it nice and light. You want this kind of misty, aura-like glow, almost very Harry Potter when Sirius gets taken away. Sorry if you've not watched it. Let's grab then freeform using our cursor and just scale it into the center here of our little monument design here. Little something like that, lovely. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and tap on it. We'll change its blend mode from normal to the option of add, which will give it a little bit more of a glow. And then just to kind of make that look a little bit more mystical, we'll just go to our adjustments and Gaussian blur, and we'll just swipe from left to right, just blurring it out the tiniest bit, about 3%, and tap on your adjustments when you're done. Now we've got this really cool design happening in the center of our little magical portal. The next step is to add in all the little sort of glistening little pieces of magic. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer in front of my monument. So it's up here just underneath my guide. Same color though, top of the third column. But I'm going to go to my brush and I'm going to go into luminance. And in luminance, I'm going to go ahead and use the light pen. And then max size, max opacity. Now I'm going to go ahead and give the aesthetic that there's some sort of like swirling kind of line in the middle. And then there's like a large cluster of it. So starting at the top here, I'm just going to tap away. You may not be able to see too many of them at the beginning. We're just going to tap away. Just adding in some lovely pieces of magic, just trying to create a little bit of a design to it. I don't want it too uniformed. I don't want it too perfect. I don't want it to, be too obvious. I want that little spiral in towards the center and then allowing it to just wriggle its way round and down, up and into the very top. A couple of specks out here and there, a little bit of blue. And because we've got like the background as well, having a nice vibrant tone, some of these might just simply look like blue rather than like a white kind of glow, which I think looks pretty cool as well. We're just adding in a few. I'd urge you not to overdo this, keep it simple really. We've got multiple colors as well that we want to introduce in here. So at the bottom here, I'm imagining there's going to be a fairly large cluster of them just sat at the base. And we can put a few in front of our sort of columns here as well. You can definitely sort of overlap the idea of where all the magic sits. It's not just in the middle here, it's up and out. It's a little bit closer towards us. And once you've got like a good amount of color with that color, change it. Change it to then a slightly different tone. You can go ahead and grab, say, the color in the bottom left of the palette, this more green tone. We can add in some of these in here. It's only going to be subtle, so just flex it and change it a little bit. Again, just a few here and there. I'm only going to add in a few with this because I'm going to change it again. I'm going to go ahead and grab the bottom of the second column, adding in some more now. And these ones are going to be much more blue. They'll be a little bit more vibrant in terms of the saturation levels. Adding a little bit here and there. Lots and lots of interesting little specks running across our screen. Magic. Let's make sure we zoom out, get the overall aesthetic. Let's go to our colors and use a slightly different tone. Let's grab the yellow in the middle of the second column from the right. And we'll add in some of these. Now these ones will be really white now. They're not going to have anywhere near as much blue in there. So they're almost going to come across as white. So I'm just tapping away. At the bottom here again, I just want to make sure that there's enough in there that there's like a bit more of an overlap happening. And maybe we can bring the colors down now a little bit closer towards us. I'll switch it back. I might even grab a purple top right of the palette just to see if I can get any more color tones in here, just like the odd little speck of purple. I only did a few. I'm not that brave. Let's grab the bottom of the second column, add in a few more here that just make their way up and out a little bit closer towards us at the bottom here of our design. Lovely. So the magic's kind of flowing up and out towards us down the center of this portal, making its way across the water. And we can triple check that we've got enough little sparkles at the very top of our design as well. The next step is to add in some blurred out bokeh. So we'll go ahead and create another new layer. We'll keep the same color. We'll just simply change our brush. We'll go to the option of bokeh lights. And on the bokeh lights, we're going to go back to the layer, tap on it and change it to the option of add. We'll mess around with the opacity after. But size wise, we're going to set it to around about 13 to start. A couple of dots and dashes in here just to create some diffused, broken down areas of lighting. I think it just really I love this aesthetic. I've done it a couple of times now. It matches up nicely to the light pen. I think it just gives it a really nice balance. And don't overdo it. Please keep it simple. You don't want to add in too much and it looks a bit too busy. But just a little something like this happening. You can even bring that brush size down to like a 5% and get in there with some bokeh in the center to kind of add to that, but keep it simple. Let's then go ahead and reflect this. So we're going to go ahead and go to our layers. We are then going to go ahead and turn off the water. We're going to turn off hills. We're going to turn off sky, and we're going to turn off our background color. So we should be just left with our little portal here. We're going to go ahead and swipe down with 3 fingers. We'll go to copy all. We're going to go ahead and then go to our layers and turn on all of those groups at the bottom, the sky, the hills, the water. And then we're going to go into water. We're going to go here where we've got the inserted image and create a new layer. And then if we go ahead and tap away, swipe down with 3 fingers, if a layer is empty, when you hit paste, it will be replaced with the image that you pasted in. So I can flip that vertical now. I can move that down, and our monument now has a little bit of a reflection happening in our water. Now, just like before, we'll go ahead and use freeform. We'll just squish it down a tiny bit, take a bit more of a liberty. You can even go ahead and grab distort and bring in the bottom right node and bring in the bottom left node. Now, what that hopefully will do is that should add a little bit more perspective to our 2 columns there, making sure we get this kind of angled shape, which leans this back a bit more. It makes it look more grand, and the reflection, you're looking down at it as well, so you would lose a little bit of it. You can then tap on your cursor when you're done. You then want to go ahead and go to your adjustments. We're going to go to motion blur. We're going to swipe from left to right. We're going to add in around about a sort of 12% to 15% to start with. So I'm going to go up to 14. That's perfectly fine. And then we'll tap on our adjustments when we're done. I'm then going to go back to my adjustments. I'm going to go to the option of motion blur again. At the top, I'm going to select this option here from the pencil. I'm going to select pencil. I'm going to use my finger to drag from left to right and add in a roundabout sort of a 30 to 40% motion blur. You won't see too much of a visual change, but if we go back to our brush and we make sure our brush up here, you can see it's got the little sparkles now. If you change this to airbrushing and soft brush, set the size to around about 15 to 20%. And at the bottom, just go left to right. You're going to start to add in that additional level of motion blur at the very bottom here that you just set. So we're really going to spread out that color towards the bottom here. You can drag a little bit further if you want to. You know, you have actually got more control over it the further you go to the right. Once you've painted it in, you can decide how much you really want to sort of deteriorate that and go left to right and get rid of a lot of it. So take your time with it, see how much you want to get rid of. This looks wicked to me because you end up with these lovely little sort of blurred out sparkles as well, which look really cool. And you can tap on your adjustments when you're done. Now for me, I'm just going to make a quick change. I'm just going to go back to the layer. I'm going to move it above the blue that was clipped. So it now clips itself above. That should then help it not get too blue with our little reflection down there. Now, the only thing I want to now do is go to my adjustments. I'm going to go to my water layer here, the base shape, and just go to my adjustments and gauge and blur. I'm just going to swipe from left to right up to around about sort of 10%. That should get rid of that line there between the land. That just breaks that down nicely for me. It just really tones it down. The other thing I'm going to do is go into my layers. I'm going to go back to my water layer here that's in our portal. I'm just going to go back to it and adjustments, and I'm going to go to gauge and blur. I'm going to blur it out a bit more. I think it's a little bit too perfect in terms of its kind of design. I want it to look a little bit more blurry. So I'm going to bring that down to around about 4 to 5% again on top of the previous blur that we did. That should hopefully just fade out those lines a little bit more. And then there is just one more thing to do. We're going to go to our layers. In the water group, we'll create a new layer. We'll tap on it and clipping mask it. So it's in that stack there. And we'll set the blend mode from normal to the option of add. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the color here, bottom of the second column, and your brush wants to be set to soft brush under airbrushing. And we're going to set the size to around about 7%. In the center here, keep it really, really light in the center, and just create a bit more of a glow in that central point of our water here. Just introducing a bit more of a glow coming towards us. On camera, by the way, this might be looking extremely bright, but it's not. This is nowhere near as bright as it potentially looks. It's a little bit more subtle. Now there's one other thing you can do. You can go up to your layers. You can go to this layer here, which is that original dark blue tone. If you tap on it and bring its opacity down, watch the very top up here when I move this across. If I tap on this and bring this down to somewhere around about even 30%, it focuses the lighting so much more in the center and gives your whole design a really dark look to it. Now that's very dependent, to be honest, based on the lines that you drew. So you could go up to maybe 60% up there and it just darkens a lot of those original lines. Sometimes they don't need to be in full, contrast mode. And if we take a look at that, all of those lines now are really subtle and your monument has a bit more of a darker aesthetic to it, which I think looks pretty cool. In my previous practice, I actually brought that down even further. I think I brought that down to around about sort of 50 to 30% even. So in this particular instance, I could even go to 56 or 58 on this one, and it still has that dark look. But if you zoom in, you can see all of those lines in there. So that's totally up to you if you want to do that. It's just an additional option. So once you've got your monument, you can go up to your design, your actions, you can turn off your drawing guide, you can pinch with two fingers, you can go full screen with four, and you end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed this stone magical monument design. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. Make sure to subscribe for weekly tutorials, but if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon, where I post 3 exclusives every single month to my Patreon supporters. The catalogue sits at well over 100 at the time of recording, so there's loads for you to get stuck into. You can have your name featured in videos, sneak peeks, early access, and much, much more. So check that out using the link in the description down below. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you'll love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.